Morning, friends. Welcome to the United Lodge of Theosophists, which meets twice. Today the meeting will consist of this one at 11, and then there's after this one at 12:30. And we'll have another meeting, at which time we will be discussing the key to Theosophies. A few words about the Declaration of Theosophists, and in that it states that the mission and the loyalty. The mission is to present the teachings that were presented by HPB and William Q. Judge, and we carry on that message here as best as possible. We have a gathering of students who are dedicated and devoted to that line, and because of that, we have no time to take part in side issues or inclinations of any sorts. We all have a loyalty to the great founders, the ancient founders, because the Theosophical movement goes back into time immemorial. And those ideals that have been presented in the Theosophical movement sometimes are eclipsed. The great initiate Plato states that ideas rule the world, and sometimes those ideas are lost and forgotten. And the custodians of that wisdom sometimes send messengers back to the world to represent those ideas. And the great Mahatmas, is stated also, if one has difficulty recognizing them as facts in nature, look upon them as ideals in nature. And ideals are those things which are to be striven for, a guidepost for us to follow, the light, one can say, that always recedes, that we never touch. The reading for today comes from the Bhagavad Gita, the chapter 12, entitled Devotion by Means of Faith. Arjuna speaks, among those of thy devotees who always thus worship thee, which take the better way, those who worship in the invisible and the unmanifested, or those who serve thee as thou now art. Krishna speaks, those who worship me with constant zeal, with the highest faith and minds placed on me, are held in high esteem by me. But those who, with equal minds towards everything, with senses and organs restrained, and rejoicing in the good of all creatures, meditate on the inexhaustible, immovable, highest, incorruptible, difficult to contemplate, invisible, omnipresent, unthinkable, the witness, undemonstrable, shall also come unto me. For those whose hearts are fixed on the unmanifested, the labor is greater, because the path which is not manifest is with difficulty attained by corporeal beings. But for those who worship me, renouncing in me all their actions, regarding me as the supreme goal, and meditating on me alone, if their thoughts are turned to me, O son of Pritha, I presently become the savior from this ocean of incarnations and death. Place then thy heart on me, penetrate me with thy understanding, and thou shalt without a doubt hereafter dwell in me. But if thou shouldest be unable at once steadfastly to fix thy heart and mind on me, strive then, O Dharajana, to find me by constant practice in devotion. If after constant practice thou art still unable, follow me by actions performed for me. For by doing works for me thou shalt attain perfection. But if thou art unequal even to this, then being self-restrained, place all thy works, failures, and successes alike on me, abandoning in me the fruit of every action. For knowledge is better than constant practice. Meditation is superior to knowledge. Renunciation of the fruit of action to meditation. Final emancipation immediately follows from such renunciation. And now today's presentation, the fall of ideas.
Friends, as the first speaker indicated, said, the timeless principles involving the philosophy goes back to time immemorial, and HPV put them together again for us in the late 1800s in the Secret Doctrine, Isis Unveiled, and all of our work here are based on what she brought forward, she and Mr. Judge, as the Message of the Masters. They embody ideals that apply to every age. HPV illustrated the bearing of theosophical principles on modern civilization in her magazine Lucifer as a mirror of her times. And what she said then is largely applicable now. We can see that there's been some changes, of course, since the 1800s, but still we're in this constant struggle to find our real selves and live according to our higher principles. As ages go by, great reforms do take place, she said, and it keeps making these reforms do occur continually over eons of time. Empires rise and fall and rise again. Even whole races disappear. And in his terrific selfishness, the man that was is the man that is, when judged by the public and especially society. Oh, the unspeakable hypocrisy of our age, said HPV. She had her way of saying things. The age when everything under the sun and moon is for sale and bought. The age when all that is honest, just, and noble-minded is sneered at and deprecated by the public. When every truth-loving and fearlessly truth-speaking person is hooted out of polite society as a transgressor of culture traditions which demand that every member of it should accept that in which he does not believe, say what he does not think, and lie to his own soul. The age when the open pursuit of any of the grand ideals of the past is treated as almost insane eccentricity or fraud. Those who reject empty form, the dead letter that killeth, and have a preference for the spirit that giveth life are too often viewed as infidels, she said, and we can see that is true. It's changed somewhat, but pretty much the same as then. The same ideals delivered in the Sermon on the Mount were also delivered in different words by Buddha. These same ideals were passed on to us in a Message of Theosophy, a message that goes back to the night of time. This is a message of hope and responsibility that each of us is invited to test, verify, and assimilate as we gain experience on all planes of being. Through many cycles and reincarnations checked by karma. The Masters are always with us, but they are invisible to us until we, through our own self-induced and self-devised methods, have advanced enough to benefit from their physical presence. Our self-improvements comes naturally to the degree that we work to better fit ourselves, through study and otherwise, to be the better able to help and teach others. In so doing, we develop the wisdom and discrimination necessary for greater service as we eventually learn to become selfless to the point where our actions benefit all and harm none. The Paramitas and other benchmarks, and we have talks on the Paramitas periodically, serve as our ideals, our guideposts for becoming one with nature, for taking advantage of our birthright to learn and progress out of this dark age of materialism and into the golden age, where the norm will be a society of individuals who actually practice the ideals of charity and love immortal, of harmony in word and act, of patience sweet that naught can ruffle. A society of individuals who are not deterred by pain, pleasure, and illusion, use their dauntless energy to fight their way out of the mire of lies terrestrial to the supernal truth and toward the realm of thought eternal and its ceaseless contemplation. We can do this. Most of us think we can't, but we can. Our manners, our civilization, says Irish statesman Edmund Burke, and all the good things connected with manners have in this European world of ours depended for ages upon two principles. I mean the spirit of a gentleman and the spirit of religion. We are quite willing to test the character of the age by these ideals. Only it has always been hard to say just what definition to give to the term gentleman, while as to religion, 99 out of 100 would reply in such a fashion as to make it plain that they had confounded religion with theology. So in today's world of matter, the focus is on our five senses and development of those and our feelings and so forth, our lower feelings. However, Theosophy speaks of two more senses that man has undeveloped, the psychic sense and the spiritual sense. So we're working on our seven senses, our last two of the seven senses. On the antiquity of man, we find that science has reached the pinnacle of possibility in the evolution and complexity of matter, of the complexity of matter. The corollary which Theosophy adds is the effect that further evolution of a nature dependent upon matter is out of order and unnatural. And our focus should now be on mental spiritual evolution, which is essentially what's on the board there. Man must now subjugate matter and rise above its boundaries, or remain within the boundaries of matter and perish, even more hopelessly than Lemuria and Atlantis of the forgotten past, along with humanity's immense abilities gained and lost because of misplaced ideals. Greed and selfishness too often prevail now. We look outside of ourselves for a savior, and we do not truly accept as natural the assertion that we are immortal. So the life preached in the Sermon on the Mount and the commandments left to the church by her master are precisely those ideals that have fallen the lowest in our day. Millions are content to be called followers of the modern church, but never dream of listening to a word it says. Fully conscious that a great deal it says is very good, too many of its exponents think it is owing to the perversity of mankind that people at large are not better than they are. In a world of illusion in which the law of evolution operates, the ideals the ideals of man are forever shifting as man is continually changing, physically, intellectually, morally, and spiritually. At one time, he is at the topmost point of the circle of development, at another at the lowest, and he is alternately rising and sinking, and his moral nature expands or contracts. So will his moral code at one time embody the noblest altruistic and aspirational ideas, while at the other the ruling conscience will be but the reflection of selfishness, brutality, and faithlessness. But this is so only on the external illusory plane. in their internal, or rather essential constitution, the essence of both nature and man is identical. All grows and develops and strives toward perfection on the planes of externality, and both nature and man are ever becoming, but on the ultimate plane of the spiritual essence, all is and remains ever the same. It is toward the eternal essence that everything, as every being, is gravitating, gradually, almost imperceptibly, but as surely as the universe of stars and worlds moves toward a mysterious point called by the occultist the central spiritual sun. This central spiritual sun is also known in astronomy, but astronomy has not named it. Theosophy calls it the central spiritual sun, which is behind this sun that we can see, and all over really. It is in almost every historical age, there has been a very wide interval between practical and ideal perfection. We also find that from time to time, certain great characters emerge to teach mankind to look beyond the veil of illusion and to show that the gulf is not an impassable one, that it is the province of mankind through its higher and more spiritual races to fill the great gap more and more with every coming cycle. They show that every person has it in his power to add his might toward filling it. They show that there are still men, and when we say men, we're women too, who notwithstanding the present chaotic condition of the world and the sorry debris of the best human ideals, still persist in believing and teaching that the now ideal human perfection is no dream, but a law of divine nature, and that it will someday reach and re-become a race of gods. So that's where we are heading, really. And we'll get there based on our efforts. Meanwhile, the periodical rise and fall of human character on the external planes take place now, as it did before. But the ordinary average perception of man is too weak to see that these rises and falls occur each time on a higher plane than the preceding. So we go up and down, but every time we go up and down, we go a little higher in the process, which we have talks on cycles as well, and this is covered into more depth there. Such changes are not always the work of centuries, for often extreme changes are wrought by swift-acting forces. So we have cycles within cycles too. And it's by wars, speculations, epidemics, famines, or religions, fanaticism, like we are experiencing now with ISIL, where the Inquisition occurred, and that's what we're talking about, fanaticism too. The Crusades, we can keep naming those that we can remember. But these things go on. And the blind masses continue to imagine that man was, is, and will be the same. To the eyes of us moles, mankind is like our globe, seemingly stationary. And yet both move in space and time with an equal velocity around themselves and onward. As the man moves onward, that dual spirit in him will propel him upward or downward, depending on his every action, every second of his daily life. Those who still believe that man is born in sin and also believe in the rebellious angel Satan, believe as a matter of course in a personal devil and a personal God. Theosophists believe in neither. We say that there is neither a God being nor a devil being, but that both exist. Both dwell on earth in man, being in truth, the very man himself, who is, as a physical being, the devil, the true vehicle of evil, as a spiritual entity, God, or good. To say mankind, thou hast the devil, is to say to mankind, thou hast the devil, is to utter as metaphysical a truth as when saying, as we find it in St. Paul's letter to the Corinthians, know ye not that God dwelleth in you. Both statements are true, but we are at the turning point of the great social cycle, and the devil's side has the upper hand at present. We rarely find aspirations toward the eternal ideal in the human heart, but instead of it, every thought tending toward the one central idea of our century, the great I, which is the higher self, we call it, being for each the one mighty center around which the whole universe is made to revolve. That's the lower self. So the Emperor Julian was called the apostate because believing in the grand ideals of his forefathers, the initiates, he would not accept the human anthropomorphic God. HPV recorded that he wept when he saw for the last time his beloved gods appear to him. They were no longer the bright spiritual beings he had worshipped, but only the decrepit, pale, and worn-out shades of the gods he had so loved. Perhaps they were the prophetic vision of the departing ideals of his age, as also of our own cycle. These gods became regarded by the church as demons back then, while he who has preserved a poetical, lingering love for them became branded as an antichrist and a modern Satan. Poets allude to the moral agony caused by such a duality of nature, the tearing asunder of the spirit of evil and opposition from the undying element of primeval love in the archangel. This spark of divine love for light and harmony, this archangel, that no hate can wholly smother, causes him a torture far more unbearable than his fall in exile for protest and rebellion. This bright heavenly spark, shining from Satan in the black darkness of his kingdom of moral night, makes him visible to the intuitive reader. It made Victor Hugo see him sobbing in superhuman despair, each mighty sob shaking the earth from pole to pole, sobs first of rage that he cannot extirpate love for divine goodness or God from his nature, then changing into a wail of despair at being cut off from that divine love he so much yearns for. All this is intensely human. This abyss of despair is Satan's salvation. In his fall, a feather drops from his white and once immaculate wing, is lighted up by a ray of divine radiance, and is transformed into a bright being, the angel of liberty. So she is Satan's daughter, the child jointly of God and the fallen archangel, the progeny of good and evil, of light and darkness, and God acknowledges this common and sublime paternity that unites them. It is Satan's daughter who saves him. At the height of despair, at feeling himself hated by light, Satan hears the divine words, "No, I hate thee not, saith the voice. An angel is between us, and her deeds go to thy credit. Man, bound by thee, by her is now delivered." These poets have a way with words, but they say a lot in relatively few. So this white lotus of thoughts springs now, as in former ages, from the rottenness of the world of matter, generating protest and liberty. It is inspiring in our very midst and under our very in our very midst and on our very eyes, from the mire of modern civilization, fecund bed of contrasting virtues. In this foul soil sprouted the germs which ultimately developed into atheists, rejectors of all religious and moral principles, and men of terror. Bad, violent criminals some of them may be, yet no one of them could stand as a copy of Satan. By taking collectively, they are Satan himself. For he is the real synthesis of all discordant forces, and each separate human vice or passion is but an atom of his totality. In the very depths of the heart of this human satanic totality burns the divine spark. It is called love for humanity, an ardent aspiration for a universal reign of justice. Hence, a latent desire for light, harmony, and goodness. We all feel that. But in respectable society and the correct orthodox portion of the public, one finds but a predominating feel of selfishness and a desire for wealth at the expense of the weak and the destitute, an indifference to injustice and evil. Before Satan, the incarnate protest, repents and reunites with his fellow men in one common brotherhood, all cause for protest must have disappeared from earth, seemingly impossible in this day and age. And that can come to pass only when greed, bias, and prejudice shall have disappeared before the elements of altruism and justice to all. Freedom or liberty is but a vain word just now, all over the civilized globe. Freedom is but a cunning synonym for oppression of the people in the name of the people, and it exists for caste, never for units. To bring about the reign of freedom as contemplated by Hugo's Satan, the angel liberty has to be born simultaneously and by common love and consent of the higher wealthy caste and the lower caste, the poor. In other words, to become the progeny of God and Satan, thereby reconciling the two, the wealthy and the poor. This student has seen such possible examples of such efforts to continue to appear before us today on the material level. One thought came to mind, maybe one such example, you never know what the motive is, and that's always the key. Sometimes I don't even know what my own motive is. But maybe one such example is the band of multi-billionaires vowing that most of their fortunes will be used to uplift the needy, and we see that to degrees going on in this world today. So hopefully that is a spark of promise the student sees on the material level. But our focus is now the psyche and spiritual, which is what we're trying to develop. We're working to develop the spiritual sense. So that said, this is all everything that the student is prepared. I'll open the floor for questions and comments. Jay.
You got to speak to that.
So it seems that what you're really describing to the student is that we're in the period of Kali Yuga.
Mm-hmm.
And isn't this just aren't you really describing Kali Yuga? And we know that that this is a period where people are not spiritual, that we're going through, that there are some people who are advanced and seeking and experiencing spirituality, but isn't this just part of the cycle of Kali Yuga?
Exactly. Kali Yuga, we have, like I said, these talks on cycles, and they go, I mean, it's not like a perfect circle. They always kind of up or down a little bit. But they tend to, you know, as we move, we go, we have been going down, okay, and now we're on the way back this way, and this is spiritual up here, and this is material down here. So Kali Yuga is exactly where we're at. We're heading back out of that up into spirituality, and that's the cycle. That's the series of cycles we're in. That's the student's understanding of the teachings is exactly what you asked about.
Thank you.
But regardless of what cycle we are in, since we have passed the midpoint and we are cycling towards the spirituality, at this stage in our development, each human being is responsible for their welfare, because nature moves everything forward until the midpoint, including humanity. But after that, it requires self-induced, self-devised effort to progress. So all of those principles that you were talking about, altruism, kindness, charity, justice for all, has to be exemplified in our lives. Otherwise, how are we going to move towards the spirituality?
Exactly, and it's also said that, you know, humanity needs to keep up with this cycle. You know, we, to a degree, push the cycle forward or backward or whatever the case may be, but also to a degree we're living in the moment. We're in materiality right now. We're focusing on spirituality and so forth, and as that cycle goes up, we have to be fit to be living in that cycle, or we're going to be at a great disadvantage individually.
I believe it was in the Ocean of Theosophy where Mr. Judge was stating an example of, in this dark age, he pointed to one individual who could be tending towards the negative, the deep negative. A fellow by the name of Jay Gould, after the American Civil War, he tried to monopolize all the railroads, stuff like that, and that monopoly trying to control. And today, I'm thinking about this individual, this young billionaire, since you didn't mention billionaire, who raised from something like $14 to $700 and some dollars for this pill for HIV, something like that. And again, this monopoly, not concerned with the welfare of others, but yet himself, you know, trying to accumulate wealth and control and power. It seems like that's another example of what Mr. Judge is referring to, about those individuals who are seeking wealth and just tending in that direction just for themselves.
Exactly.
That's an example.
The student thinks that's a perfect example. He certainly did endear himself on the Hill last week, and I don't know that he's got any friends any left, but he's that's the guy that started charging $700 a pill.
Yeah, over $700.
A life-saving pill.
Yeah.
That's the student's understanding of
Yeah.
The height of greed.
Yeah.
And the height of deceitfulness and whatever other words you want to lay on the person.
So
that's the opposite of where we want to go.
yeah, as a follow-up, now take sacrifices. In other words, I think so. It's in either the Light of Asia or in the Gita where Krishna or Buddha says all you need is a flower, but in terms of sacrifices, and we can see where in certain, especially throughout the world, that sacrifice eventually led to blood sacrifices. Some of that. Is that a good example of the fall of ideals, meaning that all you needed was a flower, but then it got to the point where the cycles got so dark that they were sacrificing humans and human hearts and all this kind of stuff? That would be an example?
certainly the idea of sacrifice is I think a spiritual idea, if we understand it, if I understand it correctly, and that's something that we have to do. We have to sacrifice ourselves for the benefit of all. But that goes, in this student's understanding, just a total misinterpretation of the idea of sacrifice. Sacrifice meaning that you know, share your meal with another or something like that. It's the student's idea. If we're both hungry, we split it in two, and to the point where, you know, if somebody out there needs help, we recognize that help and we give it to them if we can. Given, you know, we're supposed to use discrimination and all that too.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I'm thinking of basically the rise of the priests again, meaning that they're the ones who pretty much who create the rites and rituals for the tribes and the races, and they are the ones who sort of like inculcate these things and make it the code of the tribe, something like that, and come up with this idea of original sin and inherent imperfectibility, whereas in fact that's the reverse of what the high spiritual teachers taught and presented. Mm-hmm. So it's them taking the ideal and not able to live up to it themselves, and then started to question what the messengers thought, and then they start creating all these differences among the people themselves to follow.
Right. It's this understanding that this idea of trying to bring it down to the point where the common masses can understand, you know, was something that may have started out with the best of intentions, but that's how we get factored in these misleading things like vicarious atonement and original sin and all that. And that stuff has got to go. That's the way this student understands it anyway. Okay.
But doesn't that also include ignorance?
Of course.
Some of these people are very ignorant themselves. So out of ignorance, wisdom can certainly not come. That is why freedom of thought at first is so very necessary, that we have to be able to think for ourselves. And when we are put in those positions where collective thinking takes place under the guidance of another human being who's ignorant, then tremendous evil comes forth.
If we're in this realm, we learn to think. We have to be selfless to get into that level. Is that the kind of thing you're thinking about here? Because to go from here to here, it's got to be selfless. And if we're ignorant and selfish, you know, we're on the ignorant side. We're down here, in the intellectual and in the psychic up here. But to benefit all of humanity is where we got to go. To help all and harm none.
It's
not a matter of ignorance. You have to have gone through the phase of ignorance or whatever. Overcome ignorance, if you will. It's not a one-step process.
It isn't a one-step development.
That's why we're here trying to learn this stuff.
Spiritually, psychically, mentally, physically. At this stage, we are at the highest point of physical development. But that was done.
Could you repeat that? I was not.
Humanity in cyclic form develops physically, mentally, psychically, intellectually, and spiritually, and they do not all correspond with one another. At this stage we are in, we have reached the highest point in physical development. But HPB says in all of her writings that we should have overcome materiality at this stage, that we're still enmeshed in it, that the evil is that we haven't grown out of it. We're still very much attached to it, and that attachment causes tremendous ills. For instance, when people are just after getting wealth, which you just gave an example, not thinking of the welfare of the others. Even Buddha said, when you earn your income for your livelihood, you must not injure another human being in the process. So these are universal dictum that we have to live by. It's not just one age and then we forget it for the next age. So that we haven't grown out of the physical sense stage of our development is abnormal, because we are now grown men. We are not in childhood anymore. So we need to move through it and not get enmeshed in it.
Absolutely.
To ask a clarifying question from earlier part of your talk, you spoke about the spiritual sun, what's behind the sun. Is this related in any way to Kumaras?
Yeah. We have I think you're getting in the hierarchy of beings on the spiritual level and so forth. Yeah. I mean, the central spiritual sun is in the universe, and that's the highest level of spirituality, and that's what we're working to tap into as individuals and humans, and we are progressing as the same, just like the universe is progressing, as it came out in the talk a little bit too.
In the secret doctrine, the Kumaras are mentioned. They are the ones who lighted up the mind
Exactly.
in the middle of the third root race in the Cyclopean age. So we owe them a tremendous debt, because mental development would not have been possible without them actually incarnating in the physical forms and lighting up the mind. Because in this philosophy, the philosophy of Theosophy, the wisdom of the ages, the mind works in a double way. One is the lower and the other is the higher. Even though it's one mind, it works in two different ways when we are incarnated in a body. The lower mind is the intellectual mind, which normally goes with personal stuff. It is selfish and self-centered, in other words. But the other, the higher divine mind, is the one that goes towards the altruistic, because if its tendency is to go towards the higher self, then that's what it would express. So that is also another fight that we're going through at this stage in our development.
That is that our conscience? Is that what, in an everyday sense? So let your conscience be your guide.
You
Inner God, yeah.
You also referred to in your presentation, you came out with this thing, noble races. Now, I know that we are supposedly, well, most humanity is in the Aryan race. So what other race, what are you referring to when you say noble races? Are you talking about, racial races? When I say racial races, I'm referring to like the red man, the black man, the yellow man. Are these noble races, or are you referring to humanity in general? Because we have chosen people who say master race, chosen race. Now there's noble race. So where are you putting all this noble race stuff?
We define race today as color of skin, and this is not what we're talking about here.
Mm-hmm.
The race meaning higher level, higher thinking, intelligent, spiritual beings.
Mm-hmm.
That's what we're talking about, the noble races. Now, the Atlanteans were certainly very intelligent. They were far more advanced than we even understand today. They could use their mind, this student understands, they could use their mind to make aircraft go and so forth. We hear hints about those kinds of things going on today, but that was developed then. They can make a ship go without motors It's quite a few things in the secret doctrine relative to that. That's a race of and then they dropped the ball. They became, I guess, selfish, you might say, and they disappeared. The Atlantean race and the continent and all that disappeared. So this noble races we're talking about, and what we are hoping, what we're working toward in the future, is a spiritual, what we would, in terms of the physical being. I mean, the physical body is nothing more than a vehicle for the soul.
Mm-hmm.
So we're talking about a spiritual being here. You can call it a race or whatever you want, but one who knows intuitively how to act and when to help and when to encourage and so forth.
Mm-hmm.
That's the race we're talking about here.
The Atlantean race had the third eye operational in them at that stage of their development. And at the beginning, they were very spiritual, but towards the end, they became psychic energy, selfish, and they were actually using their sight and energy, internal energy, because they could harvest solar energy from the sun to actually get rid of great land masses off the surface of the earth. So that is when they sank, because they took their spiritual powers to do tremendous damage to humanity.
Where that pineal gland, which is now
Yeah.
atrophy, that's what you're talking about
Yeah.
there. So I guess our natural bodily structure is with that third eye in the back of our head, which the Atlanteans had this. They had this power because they understood how to harness the natural resources. Initially, I think they learned all that. I think by being so advanced, but then they went downhill, but because they used it inappropriately.
Now, these great moral codes that can be found in the various religions, and even today we call them eternal verities, and they don't change from age to age, and we say that they're universal. Can you say also that they're cosmic, meaning that, let's say, on Venus, I mean, we do talk about our solar system, and these teachings of theosophy, we talk about various beings, and certainly those beings, morality around or among those beings should hold also if they are eternal truths from globe to globe. So can one possibly speculate to say that these eternal truths and this morality hold still with other beings on other planets? There seem to be some consistency. There's no relativity, in other words, that truth, as we can say, truth is, always is, wherever it is. So can you say this morality, higher morality, noble morality is always the same?
I see a hand up. This student is trying to understand this planet, so I think the hand went up. Let that response go. Is there a response to what was just said?
First of all, HPB says most of what is written in the secret doctrine is applicable to Earth only, that we must not use our imagination and carry it forward to the other planetary systems, including the solar system, other planets in the solar system. And the reason, perhaps one of the reasons, is this, that as we develop further, she says that the mind is going to work unimpeded by substance in the fifth. This is only the fourth round. She says in the fifth, it will work without any hindrance from substance. Well, what exactly does that mean? If we have a mind and it works in a double way now because we have a physical sheath, does that mean that the physical sheath is going to become less solid? The student does not have any answers for these questions, but they're nevertheless in my mind, because in the secret doctrine, at the end of 1, she has a paragraph where she says, cycles will go on. Men also will change, both in physical stature and mentality. So that this wisdom religion or philosophy that was brought out at the end of the 19th century was for the benefit of humanity, so that we could learn the truth about ourselves, that we are not simple little human beings, that we are immortal human beings in the cycle leading towards a spirituality. And as I stated before, self-induced, self-devised effort is necessary for that. But she also says that in the next, our sense that is going to develop is permeability. Well, that should just give us a hint as to what that really means. Permeability means seeing through things. So perhaps we're going to be able to see through things, perhaps we're going to be less solid. But the other thing she says in the Secret Doctrine is that the astral light is going to be visible in the air towards the end of this round. So put those things all together, and you have to come to the conclusion that we're going to change tremendously in the stature. Plus, the 6 sub-rays is already amongst us. The forerunners are amongst us. And in the next couple thousand years, they will be on Earth guiding the humanity of the 5th. So if we don't fit ourselves to go on further, we will not. This is not imaginary. This is reality. And people need to understand who and what they are and fit themselves to go forth. And to finish it with, this is a student's question, the core, that central spiritual sun we come from, that gives rise to everything in our universe, is love for all, equality for all, because it is a power of nature. Karma, reincarnation are all within that law. And its concern is not for some individual or some segregational nation or some person, but it's concerned with the welfare of all. And we're referring now to that egg-shaped form that HPB has in the Secret Doctrine with a point in its center. It is inclusive of everything up to Brahma. So that egg is the universe in its totality, and that core of love we come from is concerned for the welfare of everything in it, because that power, that source, that essence, that light that we talk about is in every single atom in our universe, including all the other systems, all the other planets in the solar system get their energy from the sun. So the sun disseminates that energy into our universe, and all is under its rule. And ethics and morality is inclusive in that love, concern for all, justice for all, love for all, kindness for all.
That's what propels us onward. Now, this student is thinking about, you said a lot in a few minutes, but we can only see so much. In our physical, and also our imagination is just limitless, but we limit ourselves, if you will, by what we can see today and what we can hear today. And we can think about animals like dogs can hear sounds that we can't hear. Well, we are developing those senses where we will be able to be selfless. And you mentioned a couple other things. That pineal gland in the back of our head, which the Atlanteans had that other sense. We need to, if we keep focusing on this, we will return.
It has to be activated.
And wake it up, activate it, wake it up, if you will.
And
That's
that comes
that's
from-
what we're trying to get to, and it
but
takes
that
a long
comes from
time.
altruistic work.
But we got to work at it every day.
But spirituality is altruistic work.
Exactly, altruistic work.
And it would
So-
seem, in theosophical philosophy, it speaks that we came from the moon. So back to what was mentioned earlier about the carrying forth of the knowledge that humanity acquired from the moon chain to this chain. So the eternal morality would be the same also.
Exactly.
And as the races go higher, even when humanity has reached its seventh race and it transcends higher, surely we will lose. I was reading something where about emotion is mainly human. When you transcend the human stage, there's no emotion. So, but yet there would be the thought that this student was projecting or trying to present was the idea of the need for, yes, morality, but there's such a sense of unity, oneness, that it varies from where humanity is, let's say, in its natural mind, fifth state, versus the higher mind, 6 to 7 principles. But there again, it states also that even the highest could fall. So there seems to be like the Satan thing that you read about Hugo. Even though that's poetic and stuff like that, but we know examples of actual individuals who have ascended to high levels of spiritual development, and that statement about them falling. So there is still that question of morality or ideal that is still questionable at those levels. For individual to have ascended that far, that high up, and still question or doubt in some way, or try to forego or undergo or circumvent the law, you see, it's still some taint there.
Well,
Earthly taint, I'll say.
of course, that's our challenge. I mean, it's the duality, and I think we're faced with that duality no matter how high up we go. And as we proceed, we get more intuitive and so forth, so we are able to overcome that other side. But every now and then, that other side might take over in an individual case, who wants to act selfishly. So yeah, it's a continuous process. It's a wonderful cycle, if you will. Next week, that's going to be a roundtable discussion on the yoga aphorisms, which are again guideposts. And let's see, we're going to have after this meeting another roundtable, and that will be on the key to theosophy. Thank you for joining us, and we'll see you back on camera in a few weeks, probably.
Okay.